So we're talking about conflict. How many of you have ever been in conflict with somebody? Right? Yeah, no, yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, me either. I've never been in conflict with anybody, right? The truth is we all deal with conflict at some point in our life, right? Someone hurts us, somebody offends us, somebody says something to us. Sometimes we're the cause of the conflict, right? You know, the Bible actually says this. Listen to this. In Luke chapter 17, verse 1, it says this: offenses will certainly come. In other words, get ready. Somebody's going to offend you. It's going to happen. And when you get offended, you're in conflict with somebody, right? Conflict is a part of life. Now, the thing is, it's easy to get into conflict, but what's hard is resolving it, right? It's resolving the conflict. That's what's hard. Some of you may be right now in some kind of conflict in your marriage or in your workplace or in your friendships or your neighborhood, and you're like, how do I get out of this? How do I stop the fighting, the bickering? How do I resolve this conflict? Because it's not easy, is it? You see, we respond to conflict differently. Each of us. There's different ways that we respond to it. One is we like to ignore it, right? If you're like me, because this is something that I struggle with, you're like me, you'd rather not confront people, right? You'd rather not be in conflict. So rather than doing anything about it, you just kind of ignore it. You just kind of stuff the hurt down and just kind of move on, right? But here's the problem with that. It doesn't actually resolve the conflict, does it? In fact, what it does is it begins to plant that seed of bitterness and resentment in you towards that person because you never dealt with that issue. There's another way we deal with conflict. It's what I like to call the eye for an eye, right? Somebody hurts us, somebody offends us, what do? We attack them back, right? We get even. Eye for an eye, baby, right? In fact, you know what? We can even point to the Bible. You know where that term eye for an eye came from? From the Bible. It's literally a law in the Old Testament, eye for an eye. If someone pokes you in the eye, you can poke them right back, right? However, here's the thing that people don't get. That was a law that was supposed to be governed by a judicial system, right? So in other words, it wasn't just so that if Pastor Kim here comes and pokes me in the eye, then I just get to run up and poke her right back, right? All on my own. No, what it is she pokes me in the eye, I go to the judge and say, she poked me in the eye. And then he goes, well, then you know what? If all the evidence says yes, that's what happened, then I say now you can go and poke her in the eye, okay? You can go jab her in the eye because that's fair, that's right, okay? Now that's kind of, poking the eye. Who's going to do that? But think about that. If she stole from me, right? If she took something from me, then I would have every right to take from her, right? But I would have to go to the judge first. See, what happens is we take the eye for an eye all in our own hands, right? We're our own judge, right? You poke me in the eye, I'm going to poke you in the eye. In fact, I'm going to get you with two eyes, right? That's how we do it. Because we're not good at being a judge for ourselves. But here's the problem with that methodology, with the eye for an eye, is that it doesn't really resolve the conflict, especially when we do it, when we take matters into our own hands, right? I learned this when I was in elementary school. I remember a time my friend came up and just out of the blue, I don't even know what happened. I think he was just goofing around, I don't know, but he hits me really hard in the arm, right? I mean, it just goes wham. And I'm like, I did not like that. And so I'm like, you know what? You hit me in the arm. I don't want you to think that that's okay. I'm going to hit you back, right? That makes us even, right? So I walk up and I pop him real good in the arm. But you know what happened? He was like nuts. He didn't get the whole even thing, right? I don't know what went wrong in his head because he gets really angry at me for hitting him in the arm, and he decides to hit me again. And I'm like, what happened? We were even. Now we're not even. Now I got to hit you back again, right? And it just keeps escalating. And so I realized, wait, this isn't going to work, because if I hit him again, he's just going to hit me back and get even angrier, and I'm angrier because he's not being fair, right? And then it's just like this escalating thing that just goes out of proportion. And so I realized at that young age that if I wanted to see peace in this relationship, if I wanted to resolve this conflict, I had to take a different approach. The eye for an eye doesn't work if I truly want to resolve this conflict. How many of you have ever tried the eye for an eye approach? Right? It just feels right, doesn't it? I mean, he hit me. I should be able to hit him, and it's over, right? We're even now. But it doesn't work that way. How many of you found that it doesn't work that way? Yeah, it just doesn't work. It just keeps escalating. And so here's the thing. But here's the problem. That's the approach we use in our conflict, in our marriages, in our friendships. You said that to me, well, you know what? You call me that name, I'm going to call you this name, right? You did this to me, well, I'm going to do this back to you, because that's fair. That's even. Right? You deserved it. But it doesn't resolve the conflict. So we have to find a different approach. And here's the thing. God has an approach that works. But the thing about God's approach is you have to change your attitude. You have to change your attitude towards conflict. Let me show you what I mean. You see, you and I, we naturally think about ourselves, right? We are naturally self-absorbed, right? It's just a reality. We are. Some of you aren't even shaking your head. You're just kind of like, I don't know. I don't want to agree with that, but you really are. You're self-absorbed, okay? You're selfish. That's just how it is. And especially in a conflict situation, we are very much self-absorbed, right? We're very concerned about our rights. We're very concerned about our feelings. We're concerned about us, right? That's just naturally how we do. Instinctively, when we get hurt or mistreated, we want to devote all of our energies on defending ourselves and getting even, getting what we deserve, right? Whether it's getting even or getting an apology or getting an admission of guilt, whatever it is, that's what we want. We're very self-absorbed. But listen to this. God has a different way of looking at things. God has a different approach to conflict. You see, God doesn't prioritize his rights. He prioritizes the relationship. He isn't about getting what he deserves. He's about healing and mending the relationship. Let me show you what I mean. Ephesians 5:1-2 says this. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Here's the thing. When it says that he offered himself as a sacrifice, here's the thing. You and I were in conflict with God. We had sin in our life. You know what sin is? It's when we are in rebellion towards God. We basically spit in God's face and said, no, I'm not doing it your way, I'm doing it my way. Talk about conflict, right? We violated our relationship with God. We broke that relationship with God. Now here's the thing about that. God had every right to punish us for our sin, right? Every right. We were wrong. Absolutely. There's no question. If you're sitting here and you're saying, no, I've never sinned, you're wrong, okay? You sinned, you were wrong, you deserve punishment for that wrong. You wronged God. He deserves to have you punished for that wrong, for that sin. But instead of punishing you, he sends Jesus Christ to die on the cross in your place. In other words, what Jesus did is he took all that sin, all that wrong that you committed towards God, and he took it upon himself, and he died in your place. You see, God didn't demand his rights. He focused on mending the relationship. He did what he had to do so that the relationship between you and him, between me and him, would be healed. And he forgave us. He forgave us. You see, that was God's priority. His priority was the relationship. The priority was not his rights. You and I, we demand our rights. I demand an apology. I demand to get even. I demand an admission of guilt, that you admit that I'm the victim and you're the perpetrator. I have rights. And when we're in conflict, that's what we focus on. But God's like, no, no, no. I want you to focus on healing the relationship. Even if it means sacrificing your rights. Think about that for a moment. That's exactly what God did. He gave up his rights so that the relationship could be healed. And that's what he's saying for you and I. If you want to see peace in your relationship, if you want to see resolution to that conflict, then you have to be willing to sacrifice your rights to do it. Think about that for a moment. That's hard for us. How many of you would agree that's hard, right? That's hard. That's where we struggle. Whoa, I don't like that, Pastor. I really am a victim. They really hurt me. They did this, they did that. And you know what? We're like, no way. I don't want to give up those rights. But that's exactly what God did for you. And let me tell you this. That's the path to peace. Because until you're willing to do that, you're really not going to have peace. You're not going to have peace. Because all you're going to have are two people who are demanding their rights, and nobody's willing to give in. Nobody's willing to submit and say, you know what? I'm going to give up my rights so that there can be peace. I'm going to have my wife come up. I want to say this. I want to give you an example of what it looks like to prioritize the relationship over your rights.
Over your wife?
Yeah, over your wife. I always get in trouble whenever I bring my wife into my messages. I'm really hoping that doesn't happen today. So I'm going to give you a scenario, okay? Now, this doesn't happen in my house. We never fight, never argue, okay? We're perfect. But let's just assume for a moment that Kim is having a bad day, okay? She's having a bad day at work, whatever it is, and she comes home, and for some reason I annoy her. Not that it's necessarily justified, but I did something that just seemed to annoy her, and she calls me a name.
Jonathan, you're such a blank.
Now, imagine, okay, my wife just called me a name. Now that hurts me, right? That offends me. What in the world? You just called me a name. Now my reaction is what most of our reaction is going to be, right? I'm going to get even. And I'm going to call her name. Oh yeah? Well, you're a bigger blank. Now, we're even, right? Right? I mean, that's how that works. That's how it works, right? I mean, eye for an eye. She called me a name. I called her a name. We're good. Now we can walk away, right? And be fine. Because isn't that how it works in conflict resolution? We're done, right? We can go on our merry way and have a happy marriage. But it doesn't work that way, right? And you guys know that. But this is how we often try to resolve conflict, right? we just keep fighting. We keep upping the ante. We keep calling each other names. We keep demanding my rights. See, my right was that I get to take revenge, right? That was my right. But it didn't work. Because now there's still anger, there's still bitterness, there's still a rift between us. In fact, as you saw, it's even bigger than it was before, right? I just threw gasoline on the fire. So we have to come up with a different approach. You can go ahead and sit down now, baby. Yeah. When we do that, just take that scenario just for a second. When we do that, both of us are hurt and angry, right? Both of us feel that we have rights. We both feel, she's going to feel that she has a right to an apology, right, from me, because I just called her a name, right? Doesn't matter. In her mind, it doesn't matter that she called me a name first, right? I still called her a name, and it hurt, and it was wrong, right? So she thinks she has a right to an apology, right? She feels she has a right to get even, whether or not that's true or not. I mean, if you really want to think to analyze it, but she also feels she has a right to be the victim. I called her a name. And the same thing is for me. I feel like I'm the victim. I feel like I deserved an apology. I feel like I deserve to get even. And so if we come to if we're really trying to resolve the conflict, if we come to this table, let's just imagine there's a table and my wife's sitting on this side and I'm sitting here, and we're like, okay, we're going to work this thing out. If all we do is keep demanding our rights, we're going to have a problem, right? Because our rights are in conflict. She feels she has the right to be considered the victim and I'm the perpetrator. But I feel the same way towards her. I'm the victim. You started it, right? And she's like, yeah, who cares about that? But you annoyed me, and I said this because you annoyed me. Okay? So we're in conflict. We're both both of our rights are in conflict with each other. So we're never really going to achieve peace. We're never going to achieve peace. There will never be peace until there's sacrifice. Peace always requires sacrifice. Always going to have to require sacrifice. So let me give you an example of how this should go. If my wife and I want to come together and resolve this conflict, here's what we would need to do. Okay? So let's say we just fought, right? We walk away, we cool down. The first thing that needs to happen is I need to deal with myself, with my attitude. Okay? And the very first thing I need to do is I need to determine, is this an issue that I can overlook? Okay? Because let's be honest, there are times when we don't need to confront, we just need to overlook. We just say, hey, you know what, she had a bad day, whatever. Right? If we're really talking about coming together and resolving conflict, there are some offenses that don't need to be addressed. We just need to overlook it. Now this one, us calling each other names, that's not one that can be left alone, right? That's not something that can be ignored. That's not something that can be overlooked because it's too bad. It hurt too much. But there are times when we just need to overlook things. We need to let people have a bad day. Right? And just go, you know what? I know she was just, she was stressed. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go. Let me show you something. Do you know that this is how God treats us? You may be surprised by this. Listen to this. In Psalm 103, 8 through 10, it says this: the Lord is compassionate and merciful, slow to get angry, and filled with unfailing love. He will not constantly accuse us, nor remain angry forever. He does not punish us for all our sins. He does not deal harshly with us as we deserve. what that says is there are things that God won't bring up with you. He is not going to constantly accuse you, because he could, right? How many of you know we sin like 100 times a day, a lot of times without even realizing it? And you know what? God isn't bringing that up with you every single time. It's not that it's not wrong. It's not that it's not something that you need to repent of and say, God, I'm sorry. It's just that he's saying, you know what? I'm not going to focus on that right now. I'm not going to focus on that right now. And you know what? That's exactly what we need to do. We need to say, you know what? This is not bad enough to where I need to address it. I need to confront this person over this. I need to overlook it. She was having a bad day. Now here's some guidelines for how to know when it's okay to overlook the offense. And the first condition for that is, did the offense create a wall between you? Okay? If the person who offended you or the offense has created a barrier between you and that other person, you need to address it. Okay? Just like my wife calling me a name and me calling her a name, that's not something that can be overlooked. Right? It's created a wall. It's created a barrier in our relationship. We need to address this. We need to confront this and work this out. Right? It's not something that just can be overlooked. So that's the main condition to determine if you need to confront. Is there a wall? Is there a barrier now? But ultimately, we need to realize we need to let people have bad days and not jump on them over every little thing. Not get offended over every little thing. We need to show grace. But here's the other thing that we need to do. So here I am, my wife and I, we just had this argument, this fight, and I'm trying to work this out in my head, and I go, you know what? Is it something that I can overlook? And I realize, it's not. There's a wall there. Our relationship is damaged. So then the next thing I need to do is I need to determine, what part did I play in causing this conflict or in making the conflict worse, right? Because let me tell you this, if you're sitting here and you're going, well, no, I'm the victim. Listen, 85 to 90% of all conflict involves two people. In other words, it's not just one person's fault, it's two people's fault. It's your fault and it's her fault or his fault. Let me show you what I mean. In this conflict between my wife and I, yeah, she started it by calling me a name, right? But what did I do? I called her a name. And what does the Bible teach us? It says, do good to those who hurt you, right? It says, love your enemies. It says, turn the other cheek, right? So when I called her a name, I violated every single one of those scriptures. I'm wrong. Regardless of what she did, I'm wrong. And I have to own up to that. I have to realize it doesn't matter what she did. I sinned. I was wrong. And I have to confess that, right? I have to deal with that. You guys get what I'm saying? There are times when even though, now in her situation, on her side, she's going to say, you know what? What did I do to cause this conflict or increase this conflict? Well, right away, she called me a name, right? Right off the bat, she called me a name. And so she's going to have to deal with that, right? She's going to have to go and say, okay, I was wrong. I should never have done that. So you decide, right, before you even talk to the person, you have to determine what part did you play. We're going to talk more about this next week. What part did you play in this conflict? The next thing you need to do is you need to forgive. You need to forgive. What forgiveness is releasing that person who offended you, releasing them from all responsibility to the sin that they've done to you, the offense that they've committed against you. Now notice, I haven't even gotten to the table yet. I haven't even come to resolve this situation with my wife. I haven't even heard her apologize for her part yet, right? But I've already forgiven her. You know why? Because that's how God wants us to forgive. He says, listen, I want you to forgive unconditionally. And do you know why he says that? Because that's what he did for us. Do you know that God didn't wait for us to apologize before he sacrificed his son on our behalf? There's a whole bunch of people in this world that have never acknowledged who Jesus is. They have never asked God to forgive them of their sins, and yet God still offered that forgiveness. And he expects you and I to do the same. Forgiveness is not conditional on that other person admitting that they were wrong, that they offended you. It doesn't work that way. Listen to this in Colossians 3:13. It says this, make allowance for each other's fault and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. It's saying, listen, God forgave you. You need to forgive in that same way, in that same heart, in that same attitude. You need to forgive unconditionally. And let me show you what happens when you do that. I haven't even gotten to the table yet where I'm actually confronting, I'm face to face with my wife and we're working out this conflict. I'm still over here working it out in my own heart, right? And this is what the message is all about today. Whenever you're dealing with conflict, the first thing you need to do is you need to fix you. You need to adjust your attitude before you even go and talk to the other person. You need to determine what is it that you did to add to this conflict. And then you need to ask yourself, what do I need to forgive? And then forgive them. Release them from that responsibility. When you forgive, what you're doing is you're saying, listen, that's no longer something, you don't owe me anything for that. So remember those rights? Right? Remember those rights that we were talking about? The right to an apology, the right to get even, the right to be considered the victim in this scenario. All those rights, what I've done is saying, listen, I release you from all responsibility. I'm releasing you. I'm forgiving you. So now when I come to the table and I'm going to talk to my wife about this issue, think about where my heart is, where my head is. I'm not angry anymore, right? Why? Because I've already forgiven her. I've already forgiven her. So I'm going to approach this situation and differently than if I were angry, right? I'm going to say, I want to work this out. I want to bring healing to the situation. I've already forgiven her for her part. Now I need to deal with my part. Pastor Kim, would you come up here? I want to show you what this might look like. So we've taken some time, we've parted. I've dealt with me. Right? I've dealt with me. I've fixed my attitude. I've recognized the part that I had to play, right, in this conflict. I've forgiven her for her part. But now I need to talk with her because we got to deal with this, right? So this is how I would approach it. And I'd say, honey, deja vu. I've been here before. I did it again. I got in trouble again. Okay, so I would say, honey, I want you to know I'm sorry for when I called you that name. That was wrong. Now, notice what I did. I didn't say anything about what she did. I said nothing about that, right? The first thing I dealt with was my part. Why? Because I was wrong. Didn't matter what she did. See, oftentimes we look at it like that. Well, but she did this, and that's why I did this. Doesn't matter. You were wrong. So deal with your part. If you want to resolve this, you deal with your part. You let God deal with her on her part, right? And so you say, listen, I'm sorry for what I said to you. That was wrong. I had no right to do that. And then I can even ask and say, can you forgive me, right? Now, after I've done that, I can confront her. If I feel like I need to confront her on her part, right? I can say, but listen, honey, I need you to understand that when you called me that name, it hurt me deeply. I've forgiven you, but it hurt me really bad. And I just want you to know that. Okay? Now notice I didn't come at her and go, you are so mean. You are so wrong in what you did. Right? I didn't say all that. All I did was talk about my feelings. I simply said, listen, that what you did hurt me deeply. You can't argue when someone's talking about their feelings, right? Even if she didn't mean to hurt my feelings, the reality is she did, even if it was unintentional. So all I'm doing is I'm talking about my feelings. Listen, this hurt me. And I just need you to know that. And then that's it. Now, the ball's in her court, whatever she decides to do. Now, maybe she doesn't want to forgive me. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's like, hey, I'm good, and that's fine. That's up to her. That's between her and God, right? I've taken care of my part. She has to now take care of hers. I've done everything that I can do. This is how you deal with conflict. You deal with you first, your attitude. You prioritize the relationship, not your rights. And you do that by acknowledging your part and forgiving her for hers. Right? That's how you deal with conflict. You can go ahead. I noticed you didn't say you're sorry for your part, but that's okay. Whatever. Forget it. I've already forgiven you. Think about this for a moment. The way that we've been handling conflict, this eye for an eye approach doesn't work. This get even approach doesn't work. This approach where I'm worried, I'm focused on my rights, doesn't work. If you want to resolve conflict, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your family relations, whether it's at work, you need to practice God's approach. And this is God's approach. This is God's approach, where you prioritize the relationship and sacrifice your rights if need be. Think about this for a moment. How many marriages, how many friendships, how many family relationships could be restored if we did it God's way instead of our way? How many marriages have just devolved into a place of where they're on the verge of divorce because they're just so focused on their rights and what the other person did to them? How many marriages would be healed and brought together if they just simply practiced this? How many relationships are represented in this room today that are in conflict could be healed if we practiced God's approach instead of our own? We're going to get into conflict. Jesus promised us that. He said offenses are going to come. How are we dealing with it, though? How are we dealing with it?